Welcome back, audience, to our second hour of our show with nanolipids, metabolism, and mango system. But in particular, on this part, as I stated in the earlier half of the show, is I'm going to introduce a very special guest, and I'm honored to have him here, Dr. Gary E. Marchant. He is a Lincoln Professor of Emerging Technologies in the College of Law and Ethics, and also Executive Director of the Center for Law, Science, and Technology, as well as a Professor of the School of Life Science at Arizona State University. And what is very interesting about Dr. Marchant is that many of the papers that he's written or authored, he's also editor-in-chief of the Harvard Journal of Law and Technology. He has written many articles and also a definitive book in reference to freezing carbon dioxide emissions and also liability insurance coverage for hazardous waste materials, liabilities. But in this, when you review his history, it sort of parallels my history. I was just a little bit ahead, but the thing is, I'm going to share a little bit of history with you, audience, is that Dr. Marchant, which he's going to tell us, and today was a special day, and I appreciate him taking the time to be on this show because he is under a hectic schedule. He had to go to, and he can explain if he wants to, testify in Congress today in reference to nanotechnology and other emerging technologies. And in particular, my attorney, who's in Castleberry, Florida, Mr. Kevin Mangum of Mangum and Associates, who handles our Florida business affairs, he was a guest in the audience for the 2011 Annual Utah Judicial Conference, which was this year in September. And Dr. Marchant did a lecture on emerging technologies and the future of law. And Kevin wrote me an email and said, Hildy, do you know this guy? You need to know this guy because he's talking about nano and he's talking like you and you're a crazy scientist, okay? And I take it with great honor, Dr. Marchant. If you were referred by Mr. Kevin Mangum, known as Bulldog, you are in the greatest of company, and I appreciate that. But
well, I'm honored that he recommended me in the show today.
Yes, and I appreciate that because I know, from as a professor and being into everything that you have to be to maintain papers and to maintain. You have written a number of articles, a number of books, which is very good, audience. We're going to have these linked to the website so you can review and look at your leisure. But he, as with many of my people that I've had, specifically confirming my aspects of nano and what my concern has been in the beginning, meaning it has its benefits, but at the same time, there's not a material safety data sheet on it. And the thing is that the accumulation is a whole other situation. But the thing is, Dr. Marchant's emerging technologies for the future of law, because he is a law professor, he is seeing some pioneering things that was in this document, and I'd like you to share with us whatever you can share with us in that aspect, and we can go from there, Dr. Marchant.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm a law professor. I was initially trained as a scientist, as were you, and what I'm looking at is a whole series of different technologies that are all sort of coming into fruition around the same time period, basically the next decade or so, some really fundamental technologies that have been percolating in the lab for 10 or 20 or 30 years, and we've sort of been hearing about them a lot of times through science fiction and things like that, are all of a sudden coming true all at one time. And so it's sort of overwhelming all of us. It's overwhelming our legal systems, which is what I'm specifically looking at, of how do we manage these kind of technologies, and they're coming so big and so fast, we really have a hard time dealing with that. But it also overwhelms a lot of times us as individuals, that our life is going to change so much over the next decade. And so I'm interested in trying to figure out, how that's going to happen, how can we sort of try to manage that and get sort of a handle on it. before we're sort of just overwhelmed by it.
Right, and this is to commend you, meaning you're taking an active role of even what is scientific research and everything, with the university systems and that, so that universities are looked at for the answers. At the same time, it's many universities now are the licensee to, the industrialization of many of these technologies.
That's true. That universities have sort of gotten in on the business of this, and in some ways that's good. Maybe it's better that a university gets some money rather than just private companies. But on the other hand, I think it does raise a concern about the university's objectivity, whether it's sort of getting, bought out or gets too much of a conflict of interest by having its own economic interest in promoting a certain technology that might have, patents in or other, financial
trademarks
interest in.
or any of that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And the National Resource Council wrote a beautiful book on managing university intellectual property in the public interest, because, and the show's not about university, but what I'm saying is you never know what you think is in the public interest. You don't know if it is or isn't, and at the same time, it's where, perpetual foundations, et cetera, this way, so that, there will always be money available for research or to maintain the thing like out here, in the California, tuitions go up, et cetera, but in certain states where they have an abundance of funds, sometimes the tuitions don't go up. Or they get sponsored in a, like with the lottery or anything, meaning if you make a B average or anything, you get your whole tuition paid in some states, Right. But anyway, but in your emerging technologies, and the thing that you brought out, which is this whole change. Change is inevitable, as you quoted in here, except for the vending machines, as Woody Allen said.
Right.
And I
exactly.
love the way I could see how Kevin loved your presentation. But just looking at just biotechnology and genetics now are one category. You have nanotechnology, you have computing and communication technologies, and neurobiology and cognitive sciences, meaning, putting it can be as simple as, hey, we started with nano particles, nano tubes, nano wires, whatever, in those categories of microarrays. They became the parts. Now we make the tool, which we now call a mesogen, which is like a skeleton hand, audience, but with these components in it. And then it makes layered, so it can be a pneumatic, meaning it expands up, or dielectric. I think the new one is dielectric mesogen, etc. And hey, that might be a way to control your brain for seizures or not. It may be as simple as getting it into your body without surgery, using nano needles to get it in, through the ear or anything. What I'm saying is, these technologies existing, you're recognizing the potential for legal concern. Not only, and I'm going to emphasize, audience, not only from liabilities or products, but, hey, this could get into the environment, and we don't know how it's to be handled or protected. Prime example, when I was in industry, we would use respirators, and we would use air-supplied respirators for exposure to toluene diisocyanate because there was no media that would protect you. So the forced air over your breathing, nose, then you would not be able to breathe it, okay?
Right.
But who knows? But share with us all of these converging technologies.
Right. So yes, so as you mentioned, they are in several different areas, and the analogy I like to compare us to the previous century, where I see sort of four fundamental technologies we had. We had the television, we had the airplane, we had the automobile, and we had the computer, and these were spread over 100 years. Each of these technologies had all kinds of implications for how we live our lives and how we do business, and everything else in our society, many of which we couldn't anticipate at the time those technologies were developed, but those were spread over 100 years. What's different today is that we have the type of technologies you just went through, the nanotech, the genetics, the neuroscience, the information and communications technologies that are all basically coming out of the laboratory at the same time in real life. And the things that science fiction writers are writing about 10 or 20 years ago are now here today. We're just seeing the front end of them, but they're definitely here. There's real companies, real products, and, real lawsuits already in all these different technologies. And all of them will have benefits, as you said. They all have, really important ways that they will help people. People who are quadriplegic or otherwise disabled, they can get a tremendous benefit from these technologies. So it's not going to be a matter of saying, no, we don't want these technologies, because we will, deprive other members of our society from, the type of abilities that they need to function. But on the other hand, they also have very much more, ominous applications or implications as well. The type of issues you mentioned of exposure to some things that we're not controlling adequately, we don't understand. Other types of broader social ethical concerns. For example, right now, we have law students in my classes who take enhancement drugs. They're taking drugs, not what students are taking 20 or 30 years ago to get high and have fun, but to be able to study better. And the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? In some ways, having everybody smarter and working harder might be a good thing. On the other hand, it creates disparities. It also may create some long-term health consequences for those students. So we really have to be looking on sort of both sides of the equation of all these technologies. And the problem is we don't have a lot of time to do it. These things are moving so quickly that our legislatures, our regulatory agencies are just sort of being left behind. And the question is, how do we govern and how do we oversee these kind of technologies?
That's so true, because it is happening so fast, and it's even getting. One is, people can understand a chemical, like you could put gasoline and just spill it on the road, and everyone can understand now the hazards of it. But at the same time, even understanding how you would make a mesogen, or just even using the term, to Congress or anything, I could see how there could be difficulty even understanding the concept. This is an industry, meaning the nanotech, biotech, sensory, that whole thing, where you have to show pictures. And ideal pictures are one beyond the illustration of what the device is or the patent is, or, from that side, to the actual end product will be in the near future.
Coming soon to a place near you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, most members of Congress haven't ever heard of these type of things, and so they're up there and they have so many other issues on their plate, and they're so wrapped up in the, sort of the partisanship of Congress. Testified today, as you mentioned, and you just see the sparring between the parties, and so much of what they do is taken up with this sort of trying to deal with some of these mega issues of our economy and so on, where they have very different views, and so it's they're sort of basically immobilized on those type of issues, and don't have time to be looking at cutting edge new things that they don't understand. So I don't see a lot of hope from legislatures and Congress in helping with this. I don't see a whole lot of activity by these regulatory agencies that are really bogged down on all these procedural requirements, and basically take a decade to adopt a regulation. By that time, they'll be regulating yesterday's technology. So it really raises the question, I think, what types of methods do we have to look at these technologies and try to make sure we get the benefits, but try to minimize any of these harmful consequences of them.
Mm-hmm. And let's do this by taking it into, I'm going to call it the categories that we introduced at the beginning of the show, so that the audience can show, just the concept of genetics. Right. We started from the identification with Watson and Crick of the gene and DNA, and now it's nanotized and used in gene therapy.
Right. So, something like genetics was something that only a few of us ever had to get exposed to if you happen to be unfortunate to be in a family with one of these rare genetic diseases. But that's quickly changing now, that we will all be using this technology and finding out things about ourselves that we may or may not want to know. You can already go to a number of companies and send your spit in, and they'll send you your genetic results and tell you all kinds of things about yourself. I've done that myself. I think it's a very interesting, and I was surprised how big of an impact it had on me. You're really finding out about the core things, many core things about your own, illness risks and how you metabolize drugs and various types of traits about yourself. You can find those out now if you want, but even more dramatically in the next 5 or 10 years or so, so the trajectory we're on is we'll have what is called whole genome sequencing, where your entire genome of about 6 billion base pairs we each have will be sequenced for a few $100s, under $1,000, and you will have that probably throughout your life that you can use to guide your medical care. But the question is, who else is going to use this and in what ways? And so again, this technology innovation is thrust upon us these amazing tools that will have all kinds of benefits for our health and to help us try to prevent different types of illnesses and so on that interact with our diet, interact with our food, our environment, that we can start to understand and try to deal with those kind of issues. But on the other hand, again, raising issues. Well, who will use this? Well, insurers use this. Will employers use this? Those are the type of issues we have to start addressing. And in fact, we do have a statute now that prevents health insurers and employers from using your genetic information, but it doesn't apply to life insurers. It doesn't apply to disability insurers. You have laboratories across the country where you can bring in someone else's clothing or their cigarette butt or their drinking cup and get them tested for things they may not want to know about themselves. So you can now find that out about them in some states. And so, we suddenly have this incredibly powerful technology, again, with a lot of good, but also some more sinister applications or disadvantageous applications. And the question is, how do we control that? And we basically have no control of this, no regulation, no anything. And so all kinds of people out there. You have people selling, completely bogus tests. You have people selling really important tests, and it's hard for the consumer to know the difference between the two.
Right, and even under this, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Marchand, but this would be like, if it was like to, I want to say buy it over the internet or buy it over the counter test, it would be direct-to-customer test, genetic testing. And I honestly don't know, I think FDA is starting to get involved with that just to see if it does do what it's supposed to do as a regulatory official, but at the same time, prior to maybe a year ago, it didn't have that.
Right, absolutely. So, yes, that's how I got mine tested. I mean, I wrote away to one of these companies, and they sent me a little kit in the mail. I contacted them on the net. They sent me a little kit in the mail. I spit into a little tube and mailed it back to them and got an email saying my results are available online to go and check and find out all these things about myself, which, again, was a much more profound step than I really thought it would be, but I did it. So as you said, FDA is starting to get a little bit nervous about this, and they sort of given a preliminary indication they may not allow this to continue and without going through your doctor. And so it really, I think, again, raises some pretty profound issues of should we have access to our own DNA and our own DNA results without having to go through our doctor, or does the doctor have to be that gatekeeper? We also have issues that are before the legal system right now. Can people patent human genes? Right now, a lot of the genes are patented, and people have to pay a licensing fee to get that result from their own body, and that's in front of the courts right now.
Right, and who you should own your own genes, but at the same time, when you give a sample of blood or anything, you don't know what's really happening to it,
Right. And so, there's many samples used in medical research, and we're now applying a different standard of basically having people give consent before they're used in research, but we have a lot of hundreds of millions of samples that have been, saved up from the past where they may be from you or from me or whoever you talk to, and there's no control over those right now.
Look what happened. This happened, I want to say about 15, 16 years ago. If you were doing any kind of banking, by meaning banking, just taking your check in to get cashed by the banks, there was a time when you would have to take vegetable dye. They'd give you vegetable dye, and you'd put your thumbprint on the check.
Interesting. Right.
And so who knows what happened to those little thumbprint,
exactly.
you know?
Right.
Maybe that was part of the big human genome. Who knows? But they definitely were humans, and they definitely matched whoever the check was written to.
Right. And they can get that DNA from a fingerprint. That's true.
Yeah, and especially with, certain dyes. But the whole thing is, and this is getting geared up, audience, for what Dr. Marchant and I recognize is personalized medicine. And that's a whole new arena. And it's, even if they use the genetic testing, when they're always looking for the diseases versus looking at the nationalities of generations back of why you did and that. But the thing is that a lot of this whole group, depending on even physicians, they may have only had one genetic class, which as an undergrad, versus if they specialized in it as in their program, let alone any nano. Meaning, I'm looking at, I'm going to say my age group and older.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And,
because we didn't have it in school. We had genetics in that, but we didn't have nano,
Right,
It's up to you learning it on your own or going back to school and learning it. But at the same time, it's evolving so much. Even what you learn in ceramics and how to make it and everything and the design and the architecture, hey, that's 6 months ago. It's a new material now.
Exactly. So I got a PhD in genetics in 1986, and as far as I'm concerned, it's completely worthless because everything I learned then has basically been, is obsolete. We've learned so much more since then, and I've tried to keep up a little bit, but I certainly, aren't the type of expert that I was when I graduated with my PhD. I'm, really out of date very quickly. That's happening to a lot of doctors. It's happening to a lot of scientists. That the technology is moving so quickly that we don't have, it's so hard to keep up with the specialization. And I think this is going to be a particularly big issue with doctors because, as you mentioned, with this personalized medicine, it's going to be, again, very profound implications for how we do our health care, where we're targeting the treatment based on your molecular and genetic predispositions and so on. So we're all born with different genes that affect our risks of getting different type of diseases, whether it's a type of cancer or it's autism or it's Alzheimer's disease. All of those can now be understood to some extent and figure out what your individual risk is. We can also use this to figure out which drugs to take or which foods to eat because we all respond to those differently. We have inborn genetic differences in how we metabolize those types of products, and the drug that might be good for you is not going to be good for me, and we can now find out some of that. And then finally, we can look at the genetics of things like a tumor. And, tumors we always used to think were the same. We put all breast cancers in this category and all, prostate cancers in this category, turn out to have these subcategories based on the type of mutations that have occurred in them that have very important implications for the treatment and the prognosis of that patient. And we can now look at your individual risk of getting cancer or your individual risk of that cancer progressing or recurring and so on, and give you that information if your doctor can understand it. And the problem is a lot of doctors don't have the training to deal with that. And what's going to happen, I think, is that lawyers are going to step in and step up and say, if you're not using the most recent techniques to save lives, we're going to sue you because we know over 100,000 people a year in the United States die from side effects of drugs. And many of those are because they have the wrong drug for the wrong gene. And we now know what some of those right genes are. And so if doctors aren't going to tailor your therapy based on what your genes, they're going to be in trouble in the courts, I think.
Right, and then there's the whole other area, which is massive, is in reference to the junk DNA that could be outnumbered of your regular DNA, and
Sure.
that could be an expression of being poisoned over years or generations or anything where you've had modification.
Right.
It's all time's going to tell, but it's going to be
Right.
ticking very fast from what you and I have seen. Also, in your presentation of the emerging technologies, you brought out something very important in reference to genetic testing, in particular with the murder case, the Bradley Waldrop case of Tennessee.
Right.
Because in that Waldrop audience murdered his estranged wife's friend and then tried to murder his wife. He was charged with capital murder, At the same time, he was tested for an MAOA high-risk gene variant that he suffered as an abused child, early childhood abuse.
Right.
And thus, the jury convicted him, when that was brought out in the trial, the jury convicted him of voluntary manslaughter versus the felony murder.
Right. And so this is a fascinating development in criminal law, because people who commit these horrendous crimes, we all sit and say, how could someone do that type of horrendous act? Well, at least some of them, it might be because they have a genetic predisposition to that kind of activity, or they have a brain defect of some sort, and we can now maybe test for those and find those and figure out, so what does that mean? And that's where it really gets controversial. So, the threshold question is, are these reliable tests? And we're just sort of going through that step right now, but as these get better developed, the issue will be, what implications do they have for criminal justice system? Is the fact that you were born with this tendency to be violent, particularly as it interacts with your environment, does that make you somehow less culpable, or does it mean you're even more culpable because you can't be cured of it? And so that's the type of issue courts are starting to encounter, because people are testing for this particular gene. There's a gene, as you mentioned, called the MAOA gene, that if you have that variant, that the high-risk variant, combined with a bad upbringing in your first few years of life, you're up at a much, much higher risk of becoming a violent person later in life. It's important to note you're not 100% determined. It's not like it's a deterministic thing, but just a much higher probability of, a 70, 80% chance of being, a violent type person. And so the question is, what do you do with that? And right now the criminal justice system is dealing with it after the fact. After someone's murdered someone, what should we do with that person in terms of punishing them? Should we, maybe put them in life in jail rather than executing them because they have this predisposition that they couldn't control themselves as much, and therefore maybe more morally culpable, even though they're more likely to maybe repeat the crime? But to me, even the more profound issue is we could now find this in kids at a young age before they commit the crimes. And what do we do with that? That's just incredibly, again, potentially powerful information to maybe help these kids and help prevent them from being a murderer or rapist later in life, and also saving their victims. On the other hand, because it's not deterministic, because it's not 100%, are we going to be stigmatizing these kids or having other impacts on their development? I mean, we certainly don't want to put them in jail before they've done anything. So it's raising these profound social issues of how do we deal with this new information.
Right, and it's like what causes this gene variant, the MAOA? It could be, exposure to hazardous materials. Who knows? But at this time, and if you can get those chemicals out so they don't have the mutation, or it can be hybridized or anything so that they don't express it, then it's better for everyone that way. And even now with genetics, here in the Beverly Hills area, you can make an appointment if you want to have a baby and select what color of eyes you want, meaning that's a whole other business,
Sure.
with modification of the genes for implantation or any of this. One is the diseases and using it in medicine versus, hey, I want a kid with these looks, these intelligence, and I want them to have blue eyes or this very unique emerald green eyes, meaning that's designer genetics,
Yeah. And we're quickly moving into that area where you can now take an embryo created by in vitro fertilization, which millions of people have used to create their babies through infertility or other problems, and you can now test those embryos for a couple thousand different commercially available genes, and usually you have a number of these embryos created, 8 or 10 created. You can test each one and figure out what are the traits each of these have, and then make a decision which ones you want to have implanted. And up until very recently, the things we were testing them for were various types of serious diseases and other medical conditions that we would want to prevent. But we now are moving into this new area where we have this potential ability to test for, as you said, appearance, for personality traits, for performance abilities, and that really is moving into then designer babies. And if your neighbor starts using this technique to select kids with, say, higher IQ genes in a few years, and they actually start doing better in school or selecting athletic performance genes, and their kids start becoming the captain of the football team or whatever, we're all going to feel pressure to keep up with the Joneses. And so this is quickly going to, I think, escalate into a snowballing effect of that we're all maybe going to be pressured to move in this direction, whether we want to or not.
Right, and the whole thing is that goes back to, as I call it, from a spiritual standpoint, and I don't know your beliefs or anything, Dr. Marchant, and I'm not pushing anything, but it's like if you want to stay in the kingdom of man and keep up with the Joneses, you're missing the whole boat because it is what your choices are do affect not only yourself and your family, but at the same time, it can affect the world. And the thing is that these choices are coming so much and dependent on so much DNA. When it's a simple thing like this, you could have generations of parents that were alcoholics, but you can make a choice too not to be. Or you could always say, do that. I mean, it's just telling yourself sometimes in communication, get above it.
Yeah, all these things have an environmental component and a genetic component together. So there always is some element of choice involved there. And so those are important to keep in mind that we're really dealing with both together.
Right, because it's like you got to have the right communication with your body too, where you can talk, not meaning mentally talk to you know what I mean, that way. But on your other next topic is nanotechnology. I've been involved with it since 2003, specifically in 2006, in identification of advanced materials in individuals. But this thing is growing daily. In keeping up with the trade journals, the scientific papers, the businesses, and who's buying what, who's selling what dye, what's going on. It's just growing. It's from audience. It's not just chemicals now. It's dyes. It's the future of taking maybe your wrench and putting it in a machine and making it into a wrench. By just putting in powders. I'm just using that as an example. I know it's coming.
Yeah, these 3D printers are amazing. So nanotechnology.
Aren't they?
Yeah,
I had a colleague that I worked with for 7 years, director, he's passed away, Marshall Segoe, and he invented the high-definition TV in 1961. Now everything's changed. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really
is. Amazing.
And so this technology of nanotechnology is basically when you have particles at a very small size, about 1/100,000th of a hair width. They behave very differently. And so if you say take gold, which is an inert material at the level we're used to dealing with it in golden color, and doesn't react very much, and it's solid, and it doesn't conduct electricity. When you put it at the nanoscale, it might be red in color, and it might be liquid, and it might be incredibly reactive, and it conducts electricity. And so what happens down at this small level is these things basically become a lot more active and do different properties. And so you can exploit that for beneficial purposes. Again, you can get strength and electrical performance and other things it can do that, again, have a lot of potential benefits. But the other side of it, of course, is it also dangerous if these things are getting into your body or whatever. And so, again, this technology is moving so quickly. It really didn't exist to a large extent, to any known extent 10 years ago, and all of a sudden it's going to be coming. It's already in thousands of different products out on the market today and being produced, in hundreds of tons around the world, getting in the air, people breathing it, and so on. And the other problem is we don't really understand how to predict if it's dangerous or not. At least with a chemical, we can look at its chemical structure and at least have a sense of how dangerous that chemical might be. With nanotechnology, it's not the chemical structure that seems to be the key attribute. It's rather things like surface properties, size, and things like that we have no models to predict. And so there are things like carbon nanotubes, for example, used in a lot of different products, some 50,000 different kinds possible in the United States. And some of these seem to act almost like asbestos in our bodies, and others seem to be completely inert. And we really don't know why some are the dangerous ones and some aren't. But we do know we don't have enough laboratory space to test all 50,000 of them. So we're really in a bit of a bind about how you do this. One thing we could do is just not go forward with it, but the problem is there's tremendous benefits again. I mean, much of the most exciting research being done in cancer treatment is with these nano drugs. much of the work being done in alternative clean energies and solar energy and battery power and fuel cells and wind energy is using nanotechnology. So there's tremendous environmental benefits, tremendous health benefits. We can't just throw that all out. I don't think people are going to be willing to do that. But on the other hand, we've got to figure out how to manage the risks from these technologies, and there's so many different of these nanoparticles. It's, again, just overwhelmed our existing systems to manage them.
Right, and even in projections of nanotechnology, and I'm quoting from your presentation, meaning just from, we're in the year 2011, just from 2005 to 2014, we just only got, 3 more years to go. The
right.
nanotechnology in business, in the multiple business, meaning the materials, the intermediates, and how it's nano-embedded, meaning how these nanomaterials are used in products, okay? Could be odor-free socks or whatever. The thing is, the impact will be $2.9 trillion in products across that value chain by 2014. And that might even be higher, audience, because these are all used in alternative energy sources, et cetera. It's just amazing how it can be done, in so many different things,
And so quickly, that's amazing.
Right. It's passing through the system without even getting tested,
Exactly, because we don't know what type of test to do. I mean, that's the problem. Is the pace of these technologies.
Yeah, and then now, taking these technologies and just going into another area, we know that they're used in health and everything. Many companies, many everything is involved, and individuals. But look at just the use in what is going to be the new realm of businesses is surveillance technologies.
Yes, right.
I mean,
again, this is a fascinating technology with a lot of upsides, but a lot of sort of a scary side as well. That we now have, as you know, and your cell phone probably has a GPS chip now that's keeping track of where you're going, and these type of technologies are being put in more and more types of products, more and more cameras everywhere that you often don't even see that are all sort of keeping track of where you're at and using that information. Again, big benefits. The police can use that to solve horrific crimes and catch terrible criminals they otherwise wouldn't have. We can use it to, keep track of our kids and make sure they're safe and not speeding in cars, because we can get real-time information of how fast they're moving or where they're located. We can, if we have an elderly parent or somebody doing a long drive, we can basically track to make sure they're not breaking down and they're getting there safely. A lot of benefits of this. Sort of one of the funnier ones is there's all these services now where young people can put in what they're looking for in a potential mate, and when they get within 50 feet of someone with the same match, a distinctive ring goes off in the room, and you look around to see who your potential mate may be. So people like that kind of thing. On the other hand, there's a lot of sort of more negative implications. There's the issue of, what kind of privacy do we have from the government tracking us? And that issue is before the U.S. Supreme Court this year. They'll have a decision by June on whether the police can put these GPS chips on your cars. There's issues of other people tracking you, ex-girlfriends or ex-spouses tracking people. Number of cases of that, several hundred a year occurring already. We know of that. People can plant a chip on your car and follow where you're going and use that to figure out, all kinds of things about you. People can look at your photos you're posting on different social media and use that to figure out where you are and whether you're home or not and go rob your house if you're not.
Yeah, profiling.
So there's all kinds of, good and bad uses of this kind of technology again.
And even with the dust or the crystal motes or anything like that, you can be sprinkled, and who knows who's monitoring you or anything. And then, like with the RDIF chips, they have now tags which are using the incorporation of genes and nanotechnology and everything. It's getting smaller and smaller. That's what I'm trying to say, audience. But at the same time, even though both Dr. Marchant and I recognize that nano starts out small, if it's a type of architectural nano that is designed to self-replicate and to build upon itself as these tools, it can go into an actual, I'm going to say a part of machine that is functional and can be seen with the naked eye.
Sure.
As it gets bigger,
Yeah, people talk about in the future being able to do desktop manufacturing, sort of taking these 3D printers we're talking about and sending them to a little machine on your desktop that could, make a new toy or make a new object or something right in your house from, zero waste and no environmental problems and so on. And again, that have a lot of benefits and also some, implications of putting people out of jobs and things like that.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like just what we learned in the cartoons, the Jetsons. They used to put stuff in their little thing and make it come out of the machine, food and everything. So it's like the movies are coming true with this science fiction side. It's like preparing our minds.
Right. There's stories of, some science fiction writers saying they're giving up science fiction because anything they try to write these days, there's someone already actually doing it. So.
Yeah. Well, this is where, this is, you recognize, you said it even in your papers and many presentations possibly, the convergence, and I said this before, this is where all the sciences, engineering, et cetera, through the technology in nano, and I'm even going to call it bio-nano, meaning in any of that, or artificial synthetic biology, any of this, it's the convergent of everything that we know as we know now, converging into a whole new aspect of each one of those other disciplines. It's like it's their transformation.
Right, exactly. It's an interesting time, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very interesting presentations in the legal arena, I think, down the road, Right.
I mean, it's really changing the whole nature of law because, again, our tradition in law education has been, teach people these, 18th century and 19th century doctrines and apply them to, boats and cars and stuff. But all of a sudden we have all these new technologies that are really raising these profound new issues like surveillance technologies. And we really need, new lawyers to deal with these. We have problems of things like, these online worlds where people are, living more and more of their lives in these virtual worlds and creating, new types of issues of, intellectual property and crimes and, people getting married in places like Second Life and what does that mean in terms of, legal obligations and duties and so on. So it's, a fascinating time. It's sort of exciting, I think, to be involved in all this. I think it's a very exciting time to be alive, but it's a little bit scary, too, because of, how quickly we're changing our world. Yeah,
but it's where each one of us are here, for a purpose, I feel, and I'm glad that you're seeing it all and trying to do the best you can under these current times because it's going to be quite interesting in the future.
It really is. Every day there's exciting new stories and new technologies to think about and say, wow, I didn't even expect that. I mean, the one I was reading about this morning were in vitro, basically growing meat in, vats instead of having to kill animals, that we could, there's companies that working on developing, artificially producing meat.
Right, like clone meat, like in the shape of a steak or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
a burger,
and see, you heard it presented. Was it in Congress or just that you read it in the literature?
I just read a story about it. Yeah, in the literature.
Yeah, but the thing is that is happening, and that is a business. And at the same time, with anything that's cloned, it's not the same as the original, but it's where it might be lacking a certain enzyme or something, and priming you for something else. Who knows? And none of us are saying if you had your ear blown off or in an accident and you need to have a cloned ear like they did in National Geographic and did a whole study in over the summer, a story on it and showing that. No one's objecting to that. I personally am objecting to when you're growing an ear that is a cloned ear and you didn't have it to begin with and didn't need it. That's the thing. How did it get in your food or air so that it made it happen to you? Because some of these materials and their advanced materials, I'm going to say formulation or how they're designed, because audience, they're designed to be smart. The term smart, and correct me, Dr. Marchand, if I'm wrong, smart being that it will build itself or have a function that will give some intelligence back, meaning that not that it has a brain, but it's giving you some kind of smart information or smart design, that it will always make the same shape. It will continue to do what it's supposed to do as long as the resources are there for it to continue to.
Right. Yeah, it has an ability, these objects have an ability to detect and monitor their environment, to collect data and remember it, to communicate it. These type of capabilities we don't normally think of having in materials, but all kinds of objects are now becoming these smart objects that can basically, recognize certain patterns, see who is there, recognize who it is that's walking into a room. My wife recently bought a Mini Cooper, and apparently there's some billboards now that will recognize a Mini Cooper when it drives by and say, "Hello, Mini Cooper owner." So they're being smart. The billboard we normally think is just a wall, piece of paper or something, has now got electronics in it that it can detect things in its environment, can recognize them and communicate back. And I think we're going to see more and more of that kind of smart technologies in all kinds of products. Again, huge benefits, but also some sort of scary implications sometimes of being spied on or whatever.
Right, and even the incorporation of these types of, I'm going to call it biosensors, so that you could maybe have it go through your ear or anything and get to your brain and then monitor you if you're lying or not. That might be the new lie detector of the future versus using it to enhance an MRI or something. Right.
And, there's already companies who have got these brainwave lie detectors that they're commercializing that basically put you and use this new technology called functional MRI to measure your brain and see if you're telling the truth or not. They can also start to recognize certain thought patterns of whether you're thinking racist, having a racist reaction to people and things like that. So, the last sort of refuge of our personal privacy, they might track where we go, they might track what we do on our computers, but at least we have, our own thoughts about. Even that's now becoming subject to being analyzed and looked at from outside and measured in some way. And so we really are moving into a new world.
Right, and even, we've discussed, that they're doing like the clone steaks and everything. We know that through modification of the genes, biotech, genetically modified, a lot of things can happen in the environment or through the people that are eating it. But even now, there's even robo-bugs, meaning small nano-size or very small, or even artificial bugs, meaning they look like the real bugs, but they're made, I'm going to use the term plastic, audience, but they have another function. I mean, it's like microtizing whatever the technology is and what is the use for it,
Right. And this is a technology initially developed, by the military, and you can understand the military benefits of this type of technology to basically have these very small surveillance that'll
insect they have a need to know. They have a need to know.
And so they'll come up to a building in a hostile environment. They don't know if it's just a family sleeping in there or some people who are ready to shoot them. So instead of putting their lives at risk and the life of whoever's in there, they can send in these little robo-bugs and see in real time, because they'll transmit back live video images of what's in that room. And so, again, from a military perspective, it makes complete sense. It's going to save lives. It's very beneficial technology. But then what happens when those become in the civilian sector, which they inevitably will, when anybody can go to the local spy shop and buy one of those and send it to go look in a boardroom or your bedroom or wherever they want and see, whatever they want to see. And there goes any hope of privacy whatsoever with that kind of device, and yet, it's completely inevitable that that's where we're going to head with that under, the existing way we're looking at these technologies. And so, again, it's raising this profound issue of how do we get the good without sacrificing the bad.
Right, and it's not just in your own privacy or anything anymore. It's like if you're in business and you've got tough competition out there, or you're a very creative business where you are always developing new products or new technologies, it's so easy for someone to come into an office now and say, I'm your new phone service, if you don't ask for the ID or any of this stuff, and sprinkle some marked dust crystal and monitor every conversation that's in your room, or in the office of that area. It's very high tech, industrial espionage from just being competitors. I'm not talking, military or anything. I mean, it can be very unique, or even, let's put it this way, you have this beautiful product out there, you worked and formulated it, it's all natural in that, and someone can sprink jellyfish toxin nanotized, on it, and then, the science side of the lab, unless they're very creative or you got a creative person like ourselves to look at those things, turn around, you won't even find it.
Right.
I mean, it's really hard now, but it's hard to stress, I think, our creative minds to the limit to recognize, what's going on and the depths of it, I think, because it's really, as you said earlier, and I said, it's a double-edged sword, meaning it can be as much good as much evil, but at the same time, it's keeping that balance. But in the wrong hands, it can be very deadly.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, I think the thing is that, and one of the things I'm working on right now is we're working to develop a documentary show about this called Future Tense, about how these technologies are changing our lives. And the key message we want to bring out in that is that we need to take control of this. That it's not something we should just leave to the experts or leave to the government in Washington to do, but all of us as citizens of this country, as citizens of the world, have to become a little bit engaged in this and have to try to help make decisions about which way we want to steer these technologies, because it's not a matter of simply banning this or allowing this. It's really trying to manage these technologies so we get these tremendous benefits without the scary parts. And I think it can be done, but it's going to require a lot of people, and that's why I love being on your show and talking to your listeners
I love
to get engaged on these issues.
Yes, and definitely while I'm thinking of it, definitely before I go into the next little topic, share with the audience, like if it's Arizona State University education website or wherever, that they can find you. I know you can plug in your name and find you over the internet like myself. So share it with the audience so they have that, and we will have this audience linked up on this particular show.
Right. So I'm personally, a law professor at Arizona State University, and you can connect to me that way. But this television show where I'm talking about is something that we're just in the process of scripting right now. But one of the things we will be doing is sort of launching an online community to allow people to learn about these technologies, to weigh in on them, to voice their opinions, to try to think how they could affect their own life and how they would like to make choices about how they could affect their own life. And so, stay tuned or get in touch with me, and we hope to have that launch, pretty soon and go public and really have not just a TV show to watch, but really an engagement, a discussion, a conversation about how we should manage these type of technologies.
Yes, and I think it's very important, and anything I can help you with on that, I'm willing to help you with.
I'd love to keep you updated on it.
Okay, great. And also, one is the implants of these types of technologies and the creation of cyborgs, which is also can go into androids, meaning that there is whole businesses looking at having I'm going to call it a robotized robot that looks flesh-looking and, has 2 liters of blood or whatever they want to create in it, and also have a personality, emotions, which is a big business in farming of emotions and fears and everything, even to create false memories or anything, like what they see in false memory syndrome. But, I've had individuals that, said, ocular implant or anything in their eyes. And that technology in nano is not only on the front lens or anything that was done in nano soldiers, so you could see a video or, be streamed in or anything. And but it also links in the back of the eye or anything. So it's very hard for, I want to say, the average neurosurgeon to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they had a patient come in and said, I think I have an ocular implant, but I didn't volunteer for this.
Right, right. And again, these things will start gradually. I mean, things like treating Parkinson's by putting an implant in your brain, a deep brain stimulation. And we're finding that not only may control your Parkinson's, but may change your personality, and it may also be something you can adjust to make your happiness go up and down each day by just turning a button. And maybe we'd all like one of those in our brains at some point. And so we quickly can just move into this era where these types of machines start becoming parts of our body, and we, again, serving good purposes, but again, raising issues of, if you can sit in a room all day and turn a button and make your brain feel like it's really happy, is that a way to live your life? I mean, I don't think it is, but you could see people getting drawn into that trap. Or this inequality of some people having basically Google connected to their brains in a few years while others don't. What kind of advantage would that give them?
Immortalization, yeah.
Yes,
Google connected to their brains.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you, Dr. Merchant. I hear the music in the background. That means we're coming up to the hour and the close of our show. I appreciate you leaving Congress and getting to your area that you could join us on this show. And I know I'm looking forward to sending it to you and getting it out there.
Wonderful. Good to talk to you.
Same here, and I hope in the future that you'll be a guest again and we can talk in special topics that you want to bring forward to the public, okay?
Sounds great. Look forward to it.
Okay, and have a safe trip back to Arizona, okay?
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And audience, please look at the information on the show so that you can have access to winning winning any of the prizes, okay? There will be a prize for the Mega Mango, and enjoy. Take care, and look forward to the future of new topics, okay? Bye-bye.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
Welcome back, audience, to our second hour of our show with nanolipids, metabolism, and Mega Mango system. But in particular, on this part, as I stated in the earlier half of the show, is I'm going to introduce a very special guest, and I'm honored to have him here, Dr. Gary E. Marchant. He is a Lincoln Professor of Emerging Technologies in the College of Law and Ethics, and also Executive Director of the Center for Law, Science, and Technology, as well as a Professor of the School of Life Science at Arizona State University. And what is very interesting about Dr. Marchant is that many of the papers that he's written or authored, he's also editor-in-chief of the Harvard Journal of Law and Technology, had specifically confirming my aspects of nano and what my concern has been in the beginning, meaning it has its benefits, but at the same time, there's not a material safety data sheet on it. And the thing is that the accumulation is a whole other situation. But the thing is, Dr. Marchant's emerging technologies for the future of law, because he is a law professor, he is seeing some pioneering things that was in this document, and I'd like you to share with us whatever you can share with us in that aspect, and we can go from there, Dr. Marchant.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm a law professor. I was initially trained as a scientist, as were you, and what I'm looking at is a whole series of different technologies that are all sort of coming into fruition around the same time period, basically the next decade or so, some really fundamental technologies that have been percolating in the lab for 10 or 20 or 30 years, and we've sort of been...
He has written many articles and also a definitive book in reference to freezing carbon dioxide emissions and also liability insurance coverage for hazardous waste materials, liabilities. But in this, when you review his history, it sort of parallels my history. I was just a little bit ahead, but the thing is, I'm going to share a little bit of history with you, audience, is that Dr. Marchand, which he's going to tell us, and today was a special day, and I appreciate him taking the time to be on this show because he is under a hectic schedule. He had to go to, and he can explain if he wants to, testify in Congress today in reference to nanotechnology and other emerging technologies. And in particular, my attorney, who's in Castleberry, Florida, Mr. Kevin Mangum of Mangum and Associates, who handles our Florida business affairs, he was a guest in the audience for the 2011 Annual Utah Judicial Conference, which was this year in September. And Dr. Marchand did a lecture on emerging technologies and the future of law. And Kevin wrote me an email and said, Hildy, do you know this guy? You need to know this guy because he's talking about nano and he's talking like you and you're a crazy scientist, okay? And I take it with great honor, Dr. Marchand. If you were referred by Mr. Kevin Mangum, known as Bulldog, you are in the greatest of company, and I appreciate that. But
well, I'm honored that he recommended me in the show today.
Yes, and I appreciate that because I know, from as a professor and being into everything that you have to be to maintain papers and to maintain. You have written a number of articles, a number of books, which is very good, audience. We're going to have these linked to the website so you can review and look at your leisure. But he, as with many of my people that I've
hearing about them a lot of times through science fiction and things like that, are all of a sudden coming true all at one time. And so it's sort of overwhelming all of us. It's overwhelming our legal systems, which is what I'm specifically looking at, of how do we manage these kind of technologies, and they're coming so big and so fast, we really have a hard time dealing with that. But it also overwhelms a lot of times us as individuals, that our life is going to change so much over the next decade. And so I'm interested in trying to figure out, how that's going to happen, how can we sort of try to manage that and get sort of a handle on it before we're sort of just overwhelmed by it.
Right, and this is to commend you, meaning you're taking an active role of even what is scientific research and everything, with the university systems and that, so that universities are looked at for the answers. At the same time, it's many universities now are the licensee to, the industrialization of many of these